You know, when you stand next to a horse today, whether you're just looking over the fence at a local pasture or, I don't know, you're snapping a lead rope onto the halter of your own horse, you're
Mhm.
looking at this massive, powerful, just incredibly refined creature.
If they really are.
Right. And it feels like they are this permanent, inevitable fixture of the human world, like they've just always been here with us. But the reality is the animal standing in front of you is a biological anomaly. I mean, it almost didn't make it out of the Pleistocene.
It really is the ultimate survival story.
It is, and the story of the horse is, it's one of the most stunning evolutionary paradoxes in history.
Mhm.
We're talking about a creature that evolved for millions of years in the Americas, went completely and totally extinct there, was barely saved from global erasure by, like, surviving in the freezing Eurasian steppes. And then it underwent this freak genetic mutation that allowed it to literally put human civilization on its back.
Exactly. And the mechanics of that survival, the specific evolutionary pressures of the Ice Age, and then the genetic engineering by early humans that dictates every single physiological function of the animal we keep in our barns today.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. You really can't properly feed or house or care for a modern horse without understanding that ancient steppe wanderer that's just, trapped inside its DNA.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are taking you on this fascinating journey spanning over 50,000 years, connecting the ancient origins of the horse to the highly specific, like, daily management required to keep them thriving right now.
Right, because we want to arm you with a profound understanding of the underlying biology and the history.
Yeah, we aren't just going to give you some basic how-to guide for horse care. We are going to explore the biochemical and biomechanical why behind all those requirements. So whether you're a first-time owner or just an insanely curious animal lover, or maybe you're just prepping for a trivia night, you're going to get something out of this.
For sure. We're pulling from some incredible sources today, too.
Oh, yeah. We've got clinical veterinary and nutritional data from Mad Barnes Equine Research, which is amazing. And we're combining that with the latest archaeological consensus on domestication and applying it to modern landrace and breed selection insights from Claire and Deniquin.
And I think the best place to start is to completely dismantle the quintessential image most people have of the horse's origin.
Okay, let's unpack this because this blew my mind.
Yeah, so the icon of the American West, right? The wild Mustang galloping across the plains. It's kind of a historical illusion.
We really?
Yeah. The evolutionary cradle of the genus Equus was North America. They thrived and evolved there for millions of years. But during the Pleistocene epoch, populations of these early horses migrated across the Beringia land bridge into Eurasia.
So they walked over to Asia and Europe.
Exactly. They spread out north and south of these massive glaciers.
And thank God they did. Because if they hadn't made that trek across the ice, the entire species would have been wiped off the face of the earth, right?
Completely. Around 14,200 years ago, the fossil record in Beringia just stops.
It just ends.
Yeah, just ends. And by about 10,000 years ago, which coincides with the end of the last ice age and, the arrival of early human hunters, they vanished from the rest of the Americas completely.
So wait, so the quintessential American cowboy riding a Mustang is actually riding an animal that had to be imported back to its own ancestral homeland.
That's exactly right. When the Spanish conquistadors brought their Andalusians and Barbs to the Americas in the 1500s, those horses weren't invading a new continent. They were returning to a ghost home that they had been absent from for 10 millennia.
That is wild. So the horses that survived the Pleistocene extinction event were the ones that had to deal with the brutal, unforgiving environment of the Eurasian steppes.
Right. And their early interactions with humans in Eurasia were, well, they're purely predatory.
We just ate them.
Pretty much.
Right.
Early modern humans hunted them relentlessly for meat. If you analyze the famous cave paintings in Lascaux, France, those date back about 17,000 years, you see highly accurate depictions of these wild Ice Age horses.
And they don't look anything like the sleek, long-legged thoroughbreds we see today, do they?
Not at all. They look built for survival.
Yeah, in the paintings, they have these stout bodies, massive heads, thick necks, and these stiff, upright manes like a zebra.
They had to be built that way. A compact, stout frame minimizes surface area relative to body mass. That's a crucial thermoregulatory adaptation for retaining heat in a subarctic climate.
Because they were freezing.
Exactly. And they were surviving on scrubby, nutrient-poor, frozen steppe grass. Out of all those diverse wild populations spread across Europe and Asia, only two undomesticated subspecies actually managed to survive into historic times.
The Tarpan and Przewalski's horse,
Right. And the tarpon was driven to extinction by humans in the late 19th century?
which is awful. But Przewalski's horse is such an interesting genetic puzzle because they were extinct in the wild by the 1960s, right? But they were saved by a massive zoo conservation effort and reintroduced to Mongolian preserves in the 90s.
Yeah, it was a huge conservation win. But for the longest time, the assumption was that Przewalski's horses were the living ancestors of our modern riding horses.
But they aren't.
No. The karyotype, the actual chromosome count, it kills that theory entirely.
So explain that. What's the difference?
The chromosomal divergence is fascinating. Przewalski's horses possess 66 chromosomes, but every single modern domestic horse has 64.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, in evolutionary biology, this kind of divergence often happens through a process called Robertsonian translocation. That's where two smaller chromosomes fuse into one larger one.
So they literally just have a different structural blueprint.
Exactly. Because of this difference in their DNA, while they can technically interbreed, Przewalski's horse represents a distinct parallel branch on the evolutionary tree. It's not the trunk from which our domestic horses grew. Recent genomic mapping actually indicates they are feral descendants of a very early localized herding population that eventually splintered off and returned to the wild.
Okay, so if Przewalski's horse is a side branch, that leaves a massive hole in the timeline. Where did the specific genetic blueprint for the modern horse come from?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The breakthrough on this came just recently from a massive international collaboration published in the journal Nature. Researchers sequenced 264 ancient horse genomes from archaeological sites all across Eurasia spanning thousands of years.
That is a lot of data.
It was huge. They were looking for the inflection point where one genetic line suddenly became dominant, and they found it in a lineage designated as DM2.
The DM2 lineage.
Yes, and this didn't happen everywhere at once. It was incredibly localized to the Volga-Don region of the Pontic-Caspian steppe. That's what is now southwestern Russia, around 2200 BCE.
Okay, so from that specific geographical pocket, DM2 just exploded. Within a few centuries, it swept across Eurasia, completely replacing almost every other local wild horse population.
Right. And the researchers weren't just looking at migration patterns, they were looking at the molecular mechanics of why this specific horse conquered the globe. It wasn't just human ingenuity, it was basically a biological software update.
A software update? I love that.
The Domin2 lineage carries two very distinct, highly selected genetic mutations that made domestication wildly successful. The first is in a gene called GSDMC.
Now, in human medicine, mutations in the GSDMC gene are often bad news, right? Like, they're linked to lumbar spinal stenosis and severe back problems.
Yeah, exactly. But in these ancient horses, it did the exact opposite.
Wait, really? How does that work?
It altered the morphological development of the vertebrae and the intervertebral discs. Think about it. You take an animal that evolved to carry only its own weight, and suddenly you put 150 to 200 pounds of human and gear directly over its thoracic and lumbar spine.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
The biomechanical stress is catastrophic. Without a physiological adaptation, those early horses would have suffered from debilitating kissing spines.
Kissing spines.
Yeah, where the dorsal spinous processes actually rub together, and they would have had premature spinal degradation. The GSDMC mutation fortified the architecture of the horse's back. It literally gave them the skeletal capacity for weight-bearing work.
It's as if nature provided the exact structural reinforcement humans needed, right when they needed it.
Exactly. And the second mutation deals with the software of the brain. That's the ZFPM1 gene.
Okay, what does that one do?
ZFTM1 is heavily involved in the development of the neural crest and the regulation of mood and behavior. In mammals, it influences the serotonergic and dopaminergic pathways.
So, brain chemicals.
Right. The mutation found in the DUM2 lineage significantly dampened their innate reactive fear response. Horses are prey animals, you know. Their default neurological setting is to flee from novelty.
Run away first, ask questions later.
Exactly. But this mutation altered their amygdala reactivity. It increased docility and made them psychologically capable of tolerating close human proximity, confinement, and eventually the highly unnatural act of being ridden.
So the foundation of all equestrian history isn't just behavioral training. It's humanity capitalizing on a freak genetic mutation. We got a horse with a reinforced spine and a less reactive brain.
That's the secret to the whole thing.
But Identifying the genetic origin in 2200 BCE is one thing. Finding the physical archaeological proof of when humans actually started exploiting this is another. How do archaeologists isolate the exact moment a hunted prey animal becomes a managed resource?
You really have to look at the transition in the soil and the refuse. And that takes us to northern Kazakhstan, to the bow tie culture. This is roughly 3700 to 3500 BCE.
Okay, set the scene for us. What's going on with the bow tie?
The bow tie settlements are unlike anything else from that era. When archaeologists excavated their middens, those were their garbage pits, they found that between 65% and 99% of all the animal bones belonged to horses.
Wow, a society discarding hundreds of thousands of horse bones isn't just, hunting a local herd. That level of hyperspecialization implies a total economic reliance on the animal.
Right. But for decades, the academic debate was really fierce. Were the bow tie the ultimate apex horse hunters, or were they the first domesticators?
And how do you prove it either way?
Well, the evidence for domestication requires proving confinement and management. You have to prove they kept them. The first breakthrough came from micromorphological analysis of the soil inside their unused pit houses.
Earth science.
Dirt science, yeah. Soil scientists found concentrated, highly compacted layers of horse dung,
Oh.
and you just don't get localized, deep stratifications of manure unless you are physically penning the animals in those specific locations. They also mapped severe spikes in soil phosphorus levels in distinct circular patterns around the settlements.
Which means what?
That's the chemical footprint of ancient corrals.
Ah, okay. So they were penning them up. But the real smoking gun is the biochemical analysis of their pottery, right? Because you don't just keep horses for meat if you can extract renewable calories from them.
Exactly. The researchers used gas chromatography mass spectrometry on the porous clay shards of bow tie pottery.
Say that 3 times fast.
Right. But what they were doing was extracting lipid residues. These are ancient fats trapped in the clay matrix for over 5 millennia.
And what did they find?
The chemical signatures they isolated were undeniably dairy fats, specifically from mare's milk.
Which fundamentally changes the relationship. I mean, you can ambush and kill a wild animal, but you cannot just walk up to a wild, unhabituated prey animal and milk it. The level of behavioral conditioning and restraint required to milk a mare proves a highly intimate level of domestication.
It's a huge leap.
But the leap from milking them to actually riding them, that requires physical evidence of control. And that comes down to the anatomy of the diastema, right?
Yes, the diastema, or what equestrians call the bars of the mouth. It's the interdental space between the front incisors and the rear premolars.
So it's just an empty gap on the jawbone where there are no teeth.
Right, it's an evolutionary quirk. But when humans started riding, this space provided the perfect natural shelf to place a bit. That's the control device attached to the bridle.
But the bit doesn't just sit there statically. The biomechanics of bit pressure mean that when a rider pulls the reins, or when an anxious horse chews on the device, it creates friction against the anterior corners of the lower second premolars.
Constant abrasive friction. Archaeologists examining bow tie horse skulls found distinct wear facets. Some were over 3 millimeters deep, one straight into the enamel of those specific premolars.
Wow, 3 millimeters into the tooth.
Yeah, and extensive taphonomic studies and control experiments on wild horses have proven that naturally foraging horses do not develop that specific pattern or depth of wear on the front edge of the second premolar.
It has to be from a human tool.
It requires a foreign object being manipulated with consistent force.
But, from a taphonomic perspective, looking at organic decay, couldn't the absence of bit wear in other ancient sites simply mean they were riding them with rope halters or bozels? I mean, materials like braided leather or sinew wouldn't survive thousands of years, and they wouldn't necessarily damage the enamel.
That is a crucial nuance in zooarchaeology. You can absolutely ride a horse in a bitless bridle that leaves zero osteological evidence. We know that organic bits can cause enamel wear if they are coated in grit and sand, but it's not a guarantee.
So lack of wear doesn't mean they weren't riding.
Right. So the absence of bit wear doesn't definitively prove a horse wasn't ridden, but the presence of a 3 millimeter wear facet is undeniable proof that something was placed in that mouth for steering and control.
Okay, so the bow tie are corralling, milking, and riding in a localized way. But the horse doesn't become a catalyst for global conquest until we see the fusion of that new Dolom-2 genetic line with advanced technology. And that happens with the Sintashta and Petrovka cultures on the Eurasian steppes around 2100 to 1700 BCE with the invention of the chariot.
The chariot transformed the horse from a localized agricultural tool into an engine of war. The burial sites from this period are incredibly dramatic.
Like how dramatic?
Well, Santashta graves literally feature horses interred head-to-head alongside the chariots themselves. While the wooden chassis of the chariots decayed over time, the archaeologists found the narrow, parallel impressions of spoked wheels cut into the grave floors.
Spoked wheels, that's huge.
It is. The invention of the spoked wheel using steam-bent wood to create a lightweight, high-speed vehicle, it required a massive amount of forward traction, which only the horse could provide.
And the physical mechanics of driving a team of horses pulling a chariot at high speeds in a chaotic environment, they needed intense leverage. They weren't using gentle rope halters for this.
No, the graves contain the control devices, these disc-shaped antler cheek pieces. The inner faces of these discs, which pressed directly against the horse's lips and cheeks, were studded with protruding prongs.
Ouch.
Yeah. When the driver engaged the reins, those prongs provided severe immediate lateral pressure. The physics of that control system allowed humans to steer a heavy, fast-moving vehicle with absolute precision.
Armed with the chariot and riding horses genetically mutated for strong backs and compliant minds, human expansion just hit terminal velocity. We see chariot cultures pushing into Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, and eventually reaching all the way to the Shang dynasty in China.
And the geopolitical impact was devastating to established sedentary cultures. Consider the Suvarovo graves near the Danube Delta. They contain stone mesas explicitly carved to resemble horse heads.
Like a status symbol.
Exactly. Shortly after the appearance of these horse-centric, highly mobile cultures, we see the sudden, catastrophic collapse of thousands of established agricultural towns across Old Europe.
Wow.
The military asymmetry provided by mounted mobility and chariot warfare completely rewrote the demographic map of the ancient world.
And the most fascinating part of that massive geographical explosion is that it left a permanent, highly visible scar on the genome of every single horse alive today.
Specifically, the Y chromosome bottleneck.
This is a huge point. When you look at patrilineal DNA, the Y chromosome passed exclusively from sire to son. Modern horses exhibit almost zero genetic diversity. Zero.
Almost zero. This points to a radical human intervention in the reproductive biology. Early herders quickly realized that keeping multiple hormone-driven wild stallions in a concentrated camp was incredibly dangerous and counterproductive.
Right, because the logistics of managing aggressive territorial wild stallions would have been a nightmare for a nomadic camp. So they adopted a brutal but effective management strategy. Identify the one or two most docile, cooperative stallions, use them for breeding, and basically castrate or cull the rest.
Exactly. This extreme selective pressure bottlenecked the male genetic line almost immediately. However, the matrilineal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to foal, shows a vastly different story.
The mares were treated differently.
Very differently. Genetic mapping traces modern domestic horses back to at least 77 highly diverse ancestral wild mares across 17 different lineages.
So they were keeping a tiny fraction of the males, but continuously capturing and incorporating wild mares from various local populations as they expanded across the continent.
Right. And humans only intensified that male bottleneck as we moved into the modern era, hyperfixating on specific traits like speed or endurance. If you look at the modern thoroughbred, a breed engineered for maximum cardiovascular output and fast-twitch muscle speed, every single registered thoroughbred alive today traces its male lineage back to just 3 specific foundation sires imported to England from the Middle East in the 17th and 18th centuries.
Just 3. That is wild.
It perfectly illustrates how human intervention shifted from basic domestication to the creation of highly specialized land races and eventually closed stud books. And this is where the historical data intersects with the practical modern insights from sources like Claren and Ekin.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
When a modern equestrian is looking for a horse, they aren't just buying an animal, they're selecting a highly specific genetic tool honed over centuries for a distinct biomechanical purpose.
It's like choosing a car. You wouldn't buy a Ferrari to go off-roading, and you wouldn't buy a tractor to win a drag race. The genotype dictates the phenotype. The Clarendon-Equine breakdown makes this super clear. You cannot fight the biology. You wouldn't buy an American quarter horse, a breed genetically engineered with massive angular hindquarter geometry and a high concentration of fast-twitch muscle fibers, and expected to excel at a 100-mile endurance race across the desert.
No, their physiology is built for explosive, short-distance acceleration and highly tuned proprioception for things like working cattle.
Right. Conversely, the Arabian horse was selectively bred by Bedouin tribes in harsh, arid environments for millennia. Their biomechanics are entirely different.
Totally different. They have a flatter croup for energy-efficient long-distance movement, a predominance of slow-twitch muscle fibers for sustained aerobic exercise. They even have a structurally different trachea and a dished facial profile to maximize oxygen intake in dry air.
So matching the biological attributes of the breed to the specific modern job is the first critical step in modern horse ownership.
It is. But once you've made that selection, you face the ultimate friction point of modern horsemanship.
The housing problem.
Yes, you bring the selectively bred, highly specialized animal home and you put it in a modern boarding facility. And this is where the comprehensive veterinary data from Mad Barn becomes indispensable, because despite thousands of years of selective breeding for coat color, speed, and conformation, the internal organs, the musculoskeletal system, and the neurology of the horse still operate on the biological expectations of an Ice Age steppe wanderer.
They are essentially a prehistoric physiological system trapped in a modern 12 by 12-foot wooden box.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
And the most glaring disconnect between how we house them and how they evolved is the absolute biological necessity for continuous movement. The standard practice in many modern equestrian centers is to stable a horse for 15 to 20 hours a day, releasing them for just a brief period of riding or paddock time.
Which is biologically catastrophic. Feral horse populations naturally travel an average of 10 miles, roughly 16 kilometers, every single day, just grazing and migrating. Their entire anatomy relies on that continuous, low-intensity kinetic energy.
So they literally need to walk to stay healthy.
Yes, the clinical science of turnout, allowing the horse free movement in a large space, is rooted in biomechanics. Specifically, Wolff's Law.
What is Wolff's Law?
Wolff's Law dictates that bone in a healthy animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. The continuous low-grade impact of walking miles a day stimulates osteoblastic activity, which increases bone density. Furthermore, the mechanotransduction in their tendons, how the cells convert mechanical stimulus into chemical activity, it maintains the elasticity and tensile strength of the soft tissues.
So when we confine them to a stall, we aren't just keeping them clean, we are actively degrading their structural integrity. When a stall-bound horse is suddenly taken out and asked to perform high-intensity exercise like jumping or galloping, tight turns, their demineralized bones and atrophied tendons are incredibly susceptible to catastrophic failure.
Exactly. And beyond the musculoskeletal degradation, the neurological toll of confinement is profound. Horses are highly reactive prey animals. When you suppress their hardwired drive to move and graze, the psychological stress manifests in stereotypic behaviors.
Like what?
You see horses stall-walking, pacing relentlessly in circles, or cribbing.
Cribbing is where they latch their incisors onto a piece of wood, arch their neck, and suck in air.
Right. And these aren't just bad habits. They are desperate, neurotic coping mechanisms. Cribbing, for instance, has been shown to release endorphins that temporarily mask the intense stress of confinement.
It's the physiological equivalent of locking a marathon runner in a closet and wondering why they're losing their mind.
That's exactly it.
And the stress isn't just about movement, it's about social structure. The survival strategy on the Pleistocene steppe was the herd. A lone horse is a dead horse.
The herd provides a distributed sensory network. More eyes, more ears, more nostrils scanning for predators. When a horse is socially isolated, kept in a barn where they cannot see or interact with other animals, their cortisol levels skyrocket. They exist in a state of perpetual biochemical panic.
So what does this all mean for the owner? Which poses a massive challenge for the modern owner who maybe only has the space or budget for a single horse. How do you mitigate that hardwired prey anxiety without taking on the immense financial burden of a second 1,200-pound animal?
You provide a surrogate herd. The Mad Barn veterinary guidelines emphasize that horses can form deep chemically regulating bonds with other species. Goats, sheep, and miniature ponies are excellent surrogate companions.
So a goat can actually calm a horse down.
Absolutely. The neurological requirement is simply that the horse must always be able to visually and audibly confirm the presence of another living creature. If they look around and realize they are alone, their amygdala fires, telling them they are the primary target for a predator.
And speaking of projecting our own human comforts onto the horse, let's look at how we shelter them. Because it is totally natural for a human standing in a freezing rainstorm to think, my horse needs to be locked inside a completely sealed, climate-controlled barn.
That anthropomorphism is one of the leading causes of respiratory disease in modern horses.
Really?
Yes. A horse has a massive internal thermoregulatory engine, their hindgut. It produces immense amounts of heat through fermentation. They tolerate cold exceptionally well, provided they are dry. When humans seal up a barn to trap heat, they eliminate ventilation.
And the atmospheric chemistry inside a sealed barn becomes toxic very quickly.
You have a combination of ammonia off-gassing from urine, particulate dust from hay and bedding, and fungal spores. When a horse is forced to breathe this stagnant air, the ammonia actually paralyzes the mucociliary escalator in their respiratory tract,
Oh, what?
the tiny hairs that sweep debris out of the lungs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this leads directly to equine asthma, or what used to be called Heaves recurrent airway obstruction. A three-sided run-in shed out in a pasture, which blocks the prevailing wind and rain but allows for infinite fresh air exchange, is vastly superior to a multi-million-dollar enclosed stable.
So they just need a windbreak, basically.
Basically, if the temperature drops below their thermoneutral zone, you simply apply a high-tech waterproof turnout blanket. But you leave their respiratory system exposed to clean air.
This internal furnace you mentioned, the hindgut, brings us to the absolute core of equine health: nutrition. The digestive system of the horse is a marvel of evolutionary engineering, built specifically to extract life-sustaining calories from the incredibly poor quality fibrous grasses of the ancient steppe. But before we even get to the food, the Mad Barn data makes it abundantly clear that the most critical and often most neglected nutrient is water.
The sheer volume required is staggering. An average 1,100-pound horse needs to consume 5 to 15 gallons of water every single day just for basic osmoregulation and digestion.
And they are notoriously fastidious about it. A horse will literally choose dehydration over drinking water that tastes wrong.
Their sensory evaluation of water is highly acute. If a water trough grows algae, is contaminated by a dead insect, or simply has a slightly different mineral profile like high iron content, voluntary intake will plummet. And in a horse, dehydration isn't just a matter of feeling thirsty, it is a rapid, life-threatening mechanical failure.
Because of the immense volume of dry forage they consume.
Exactly. The horse's gastrointestinal tract is over 100 feet long, filled with sharp turns and flexures. The dry, fibrous hay they eat requires massive amounts of water to remain a pliable slurry.
And if they stop drinking?
If they stop drinking, that fiber desiccates and impacts, usually at the pelvic flexure of the large colon. This creates a concrete-like blockage known as impaction colic. It causes excruciating pain, can lead to intestinal rupture, and is frequently fatal if not treated aggressively with intravenous fluids and mineral oil via a nasogastric tube. Scrubbing water buckets and monitoring intake is the most vital daily task an owner performs.
Once the hydration is secured, we have to look at how they actually process the fuel. Horses aren't like humans with highly acidic stomachs designed to break down dense proteins. And they aren't ruminants like cows that ferment food in multiple four stomachs. They are hindgut fermenters. So what is the actual biochemistry happening in the hindgut?
The horse's stomach is remarkably small, only holding about 2 to 4 gallons. The primary digestion happens at the very end of the line, in the cecum and large colon, the hindgut.
Okay, so way in the back.
Right. This area acts as a massive 30-gallon fermentation vat. It is populated by billions of symbiotic microbes, cellulolytic bacteria, protozoa, and fungi.
The microbiome.
Exactly. The horse itself cannot digest the complex structural carbohydrates in grass, like cellulose and hemicellulose. Instead, the microbes ferment these fibers, releasing volatile fatty acids, or VFAs, like acetate, propionate, and butyrate, which the horse then absorbs through the intestinal wall and uses as its primary energy source.
It's essentially a massive internal microbrewery that requires a continuous, never-ending supply of raw material. Which is why the Mad Barn Protocol emphasizes that a horse must consume 1.5% to 2.5% of its total body weight in forage every day.
For a standard horse, that is anywhere from 16 to 27 pounds of hay daily. And the delivery method is just as important as the volume. The equine stomach is designed for a continuous trickle of food.
A trickle, not a meal.
Right. The lower glandular portion of the stomach constantly secretes hydrochloric acid 24 hours a day, regardless of whether there's food in the stomach or not.
Wait, really? In humans, our stomachs only pump out massive amounts of acid when we eat a meal. A horse's stomach is just running the acid pump on a loop.
Because evolutionarily, they were always eating. If a modern owner tries to feed a horse like a dog, one flake of hay at 7 a.m. and another flake at 5 p.m., the horse finishes the meal in 2 hours.
And then what?
For the next 8 hours, that stomach sits empty, but the acid keeps pumping. The acid sloshes up into the squamous region of the stomach, which has no protective mucosal lining. This literally burns holes in the stomach wall, resulting in equine gastric ulcer syndrome, or EGUS.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It is. The behavioral fallout from ulcers, bucking, refusing to eat, severe aggression is massive. Continuous, free choice forage acts as a physical buffer and stimulates saliva production, which is high in bicarbonate, neutralizing the acid.
But wait, what if my horse just eats until it pops? Providing free choice forage runs headlong into a very modern problem. We aren't feeding them the sparse, nutrient-deficient scrub brush of the Pleistocene. We are feeding them genetically optimized, heavily fertilized modern agricultural grasses. If you give a biologically thrifty breed unrestricted access to modern alfalfa or rich pasture, they will gorge themselves into metabolic crisis.
Yes, it induces equine metabolic syndrome, or EMS, which is functionally similar to human type 2 diabetes. The high levels of non-structural carbohydrates, sugars, and fructans in modern spring grass cause massive insulin spikes. The horse becomes insulin resistant, deposits abnormal fat pads along the crest of the neck, and becomes highly susceptible to laminitis.
So the owner is trapped. You have to feed them constantly to prevent ulcers, but if you feed them constantly, they get obese and foundered. How do you engineer a solution that respects both biological realities?
The physical intervention is the slow feeder. Using small whole hay nets, often double or triple netting the hay, forces the horse to extract only a few strands of hay at a time.
So it just slows them down.
It dramatically extends the chew time. This ensures a continuous trickle of fiber to buffer the stomach acid and keep the hindgut microbes active, while strictly modulating the glycemic response and preventing caloric overload. It artificially introduces the friction and effort of winter grazing on the steppe.
That handles the forage. But if you walk into any feed store, half the building is dedicated to bags of grain and sweet feed. Why do we feed grain to an animal designed to ferment fiber?
Historically, we needed them to perform intense anaerobic work, pulling plows, racing, cavalry charges, things that required more calories than they could physically extract from hay alone.
But for modern horses.
For the average modern horse, high starch concentrates are not just unnecessary, they are a biochemical hazard.
Walk us through the mechanism of starch overload. What happens when you dump a 5-pound bucket of sweet feed in front of a horse?
The horse's small intestine has very limited levels of alpha amylase, which is the enzyme required to digest starch. When confronted with a massive influx of grain, the small intestine is overwhelmed. The undigested starch bypasses the foregut and spills directly into the hindgut fermentation vat.
And those fiber-loving microbes we talked about don't know what to do with a flood of sugar.
They are outcompeted by lactic acid-producing bacteria, specifically Streptococcus bovis. These bacteria aggressively ferment the starch, creating a massive spike in lactic acid.
Which drops the pH.
Exactly. The pH of the hindgut plummets. This highly acidic environment causes the beneficial cellulolytic bacteria to die off en masse. As their cell walls rupture, they release massive amounts of endotoxins into the bloodstream.
And that causes inflammation.
This toxic cascade triggers systemic inflammation, most catastrophically in the hooves. The laminae, the Velcro-like tissue suspending the coffin bone inside the hoof wall, inflames and detaches. The bone literally sinks through the sole of the foot.
Good God.
It's called laminitis, and it is a direct consequence of feeding large, starch-heavy meals to a hindgut fermenter.
So if grains are dangerous, how do we address the nutritional gaps? Because as you mentioned, modern hay, grown on depleted monocrop soils, is often severely deficient in trace minerals and vitamins.
The clinical approach is targeted supplementation based on hay analysis. Instead of feeding pounds of grain, you feed a highly concentrated, low-calorie ration balancer or supplement.
Like Mad Barnes' Omneity supplement.
Right. The MadBurn guidelines highlight the necessity of providing organic trace minerals like copper and zinc, which are crucial for joint health and immune function, along with amino acids and biotin, to cross-link the keratin in the hoof wall. You provide the micronutrients without disrupting the delicate microbiome of the hindgut.
The complexity of all this, the balancing of the diet, the management of the environment, the mitigation of their evolutionary instincts, it makes it abundantly clear that keeping a horse today requires a highly coordinated surrogate herd of human professionals. It takes a village to maintain the structural integrity of this animal, and the foundation of that village is the farrier.
The mechanics of the equine hoof are relentless. Hoof horn grows continuously at a rate of about 1/4 to 1/2 inch per month. On the rocky, abrasive soils of the steppe, traveling 10 miles a day, the hoof wears away at the exact rate it grows, maintaining a perfect biomechanical angle.
But standing in a soft, bedded stall or a lush, grassy paddock, there is zero natural abrasion.
Without a farrier to intervene every 4 to 6 weeks, the hoof wall overgrows. The toe flares forward, dragging the breakover point away from the center of mass. This alters the entire geometry of the lower limb, placing catastrophic strain on the deep digital flexor tendon and the navicular bone.
So the farrier is basically replacing the rocks.
The farrier acts as the mechanical surrogate for the abrasive earth, trimming and balancing the hoof to preserve the integrity of the skeletal column above it.
And the exact same principle of continuous eruption applies to their mouths, which is where the equine dentist or veterinarian comes in.
Horses possess hypsodont teeth. The teeth are incredibly long and continuously erupt from the jawbone to compensate for the extreme wear of grinding fibrous silicates in grass. Furthermore, the horse has an anastonathous jaw, meaning the upper jaw is wider than the lower jaw.
So as they chew in a circular side-to-side motion, the teeth don't wear perfectly flat.
Right. They develop razor-sharp enamel points.
Specifically on the outside buccal edge of the upper teeth and the inside lingual edge of the lower teeth. These points can grow so sharp they cause massive ulcerations in the cheeks and the tongue.
A horse in dental pain will drop its food, a condition called quitting lose weight rapidly, and become violently resistant to the bit. A professional must routinely perform dental floating, using specialized tungsten carbide rasps to grind away the sharp points and restore normal occlusion.
And the veterinarian's role goes far beyond filing teeth and fixing injuries. The preventative biosecurity required for modern horses is intense, largely because we concentrate them in boarding facilities and travel with them to shows, creating perfect vectors for disease transmission. Let's look at the Coggins test, which is a legal requirement for movement.
The Coggins test screens for equine infectious anemia, or EIA. EIA is a retrovirus, functionally similar to HIV in humans, transmitted mechanically by blood-feeding insects like horseflies.
Is there a cure?
There is no vaccine, and there is no cure. A horse that tests positive is infected for life and must be strictly quarantined at a distance from all other horses or euthanized to prevent an outbreak.
Wow. And for the diseases we can prevent, the core vaccination protocol is critical. Tetanus is universally required because the Clostridium tetani bacteria is ubiquitous in the soil. And horses, prone to punctures and cuts, are exquisitely sensitive to the neurotoxin it produces, which causes rigid fatal paralysis.
We also mandate vaccines for arboviruses, viruses transmitted by mosquitoes, specifically Eastern and Western equine encephalomyelitis, EE and WE, and West Nile virus.
Those affect the brain, right?
Yeah, these pathogens cross the blood-brain barrier and cause devastating inflammation of the central nervous system. And naturally, rabies, which is always fatal once neurological symptoms appear.
But when it comes to parasites, the internal worms that horses pick up while grazing the veterinary protocol has undergone a massive paradigm shift. It used to be standard practice to just buy a tube of chemical deworming paste every 8 weeks and rotate the brands.
And that practice created a slow-moving global disaster, anthelmintic resistance. By blindly bombing the horse's internal ecosystem with chemicals every 2 months, we inadvertently engaged in extreme selective breeding of the parasites themselves.
Superworms.
Basically, specifically, cythostomins or small strongtitles have mutated to survive the most common drug classes.
It's the exact same crisis human medicine faces with antibiotic-resistant superbugs.
Precisely. We can no longer treat our way out of the problem. Modern parasite management requires precision diagnostics. Before any drug is administered, the veterinarian requires a fecal egg count.
Which is testing the manure.
Right, using the McMaster technique to float and count the exact number and type of parasite eggs per gram of manure under a microscope. We only deworm the high-shedding horses, leaving a population of susceptible parasites, the refugia, in the low shedders to dilute the resistant genes in the pasture. It's highly technical herd management.
This incredible web of veterinary science, biomechanics, and nutritional biochemistry ultimately distills down to the owner on the front lines. The Mad Barn Clinical Guide provides a daily 10-point checklist, and understanding everything we've just discussed transforms this from a list of chores into a protocol for physiological maintenance. Let's rapid fire through it. It starts every morning with assessing the water.
You aren't just filling a bucket. You are scrubbing away biofilms and visually confirming volume intake to prevent a fatal cecal impaction.
Point 2 is forage management, ensuring the slow feeders are stocked with tested, balanced hay to buffer the continuous secretion of gastric acid and feed the hindgut microbiome.
Point 3. If they require concentrates for high energy demands, administering those in multiple tiny meals to prevent starch overflow into the large colon and the subsequent cascade of laminitis.
Point 4 is structural hygiene, mucking out the stall. This isn't just about aesthetics. If a horse stands in urine-soaked bedding, the ammonia gas dissolves the keratinized horn of the hoof, allowing anaerobic bacteria to invade the frog, causing a necrotic infection called thrush. Simultaneously, the airborne ammonia paralyzes the respiratory cilia we discussed earlier.
Point 5 is environmental inspection. Because of their hardwired prey drive, horses react with explosive flight responses. You must constantly inspect the fencing, the stalls, and the paddocks for loose nails, splintered wood, or uneven ground that could catastrophically damage an atrophied tendon during a panic response.
Point 6. Daily grooming. Using a curry comb isn't a beauty routine, it is mechanical stimulation. It promotes lymphatic drainage, stimulates the sebaceous glands to produce the natural oils required for thermoregulation and waterproofing, and forces the owner to palpate the entire muscular structure to detect heat, swelling, or dermatitis before it requires veterinary intervention.
Point 7 is picking the hooves. Using a metal pick to clear packed soil from the collateral grooves around the frog exposes the tissue to oxygen, killing the anaerobic thrush bacteria. It also removes wedged stones that cause severe subsolar bruising and abscesses.
Point 8 is enforced movement. If they cannot achieve biological turnout, the owner must manually provide the kinetic energy through riding or hand walking to maintain bone density via Wolff's Law and prevent psychological stereotypes.
Point 9 is thermoregulatory management. A horse's internal temperature fluctuates drastically based on hindgut fermentation activity and ambient conditions. An owner must constantly check beneath the waterproof blankets. If a horse overheats in the afternoon sun, sweats under a heavy blanket, and then that sweat cools in the evening air, they can easily become hypothermic.
And finally, point 10, the ultimate diagnostic baseline. TPR, temperature, pulse, respiration. Because horses are prey animals, they are evolutionarily hardwired to mask signs of illness or weakness lest they be targeted by predators. By the time a horse explicitly looks sick, they are often in critical condition.
Right, an owner must routinely measure their resting vitals. If you know your horse's baseline resting heart rate is 32 beats per minute and you check it on a Tuesday morning and it's 60 beats per minute, even if the horse looks perfectly calm, you know a massive systemic failure like colic or a severe infection is underway, and you intercept it early.
It is a phenomenal amount of responsibility. We have traced an arc today that spans the entirety of human history. We started in the freezing, wind-swept plains of the Pleistocene epoch, watching a stout, resilient animal survive an extinction event that wiped out its American ancestors. We decoded the molecular software update, the DOM2 mutations in the GSDMC and ZFPM1 genes that gave them the spinal architecture and the neurological docility to partner with humans.
We examined the lipid residues in bowtie pottery and the 3-millimeter wear facets on ancient teeth that prove how that partnership began.
And we followed the chariot-driven explosion of that genetic line across the globe, right down to the specific biochemical and biomechanical realities that dictate the 10-point checklist in a modern barn today.
And when you synthesize all of that evolutionary data, you are left with a profound realization about our relationship with this animal. For over 4,000 years, humanity systematically dismantled the wildness of the horse. We altered their very DNA, manipulating their reproductive lines to make them docile enough to carry us into battle, robust enough to plow our fields, and compliant enough to build our civilizations.
We reshaped them completely.
We reshaped their physical form, but we could not reprogram their ancient internal biology. Their digestive systems, their musculoskeletal structures, and their neurology still fundamentally require the vast open spaces of the Pleistocene steppe. So the ultimate question for any modern equestrian or anyone who admires these animals is this. Given that they surrendered their evolutionary wildness to build our world, isn't it our absolute moral obligation to reconstruct a surrogate piece of that wildness for them in our care?
That is an incredibly powerful framework to view them through. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you look over a fence and see a horse grazing, we hope you don't just see a beautiful animal. We hope you see a living, breathing museum of human history. A biological marvel shaped by the ice, engineered by ancient herders, and maintained by modern science. Until next time, keep digging deeper.